has been in the film industry since the 1990s, and during this their only role was to sell film rights of certain Marvel characters to various film studios until the year 2008. An example of this is the trilogy of Spider-Man movies starring Tobey Maguire. The film rights were sold to Sony Pictures Entertainment. Then in 2010, Sony announced that the franchise would be rebooted with The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. In February 2015, Disney, Marvel Studios and Sony all announced a deal to share the Spider-Man film rights, leading to a new iteration of Spider-Man being introduced and integrated into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Henry Jenkins defined the concept of transmedia storytelling, and he first discussed his most influential ideas in detail in his 2006 book and clarified his theory on his own personal blog, where he explained 7 principles that define the characteristics of his notion of transmedia storytelling. Jenkins theorized that transmedia narrative is a way of fragmented but interconnected storytelling when self-contained plots are laid out in different media platforms with mutual relationships to each other. The Marvel Cinematic Universe operates in phases. Kevin Feige, Marvel's current president, has made a schedule about the feature films that they intend to create, and they have been divided into smaller groups and story arcs. Currently, there are 3 phases with a time span of 3 to 4 years. The first phase started with Iron Man, which then culminated into the assembly of the Avengers, which introduced them as a group of individual superheroes with their own solo movie. Despite not having their own solo movie, Black Widow and Hawkeye are still part of the Avengers, and they were introduced as supporting characters in Iron Man 2 and Thor. The second phase introduced sequels to the first movies, and these again led up to the Avengers Age of Ultron. This phase also introduced new characters in films, such as Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man, while the third phases began in 2016, introducing some sequels to individual superhero films. New solo characters were also introduced, such as Doctor Strange, Black Panther and Captain Marvel. The Marvel Cinematic Universe depicts a similar world to our own real world. Most of the events taking place are on planet Earth. World War II is mentioned several times in Captain America, and there are many references to contemporary popular culture. Superheroes and villains are an organic part of Marvel Cinematic Universe's fictional world, with their own origin stories. Normal, everyday people are aware of them, and they are amused or frightened by their supernatural powers. The solo movies of superheroes have a large emphasis on their characterization, show their own point of views, weaknesses, and introducing their arch-enemies, while the films with a bigger cast, such as the Avengers, are more action-driven and story-oriented. The use of different point of views is subjectivity, which describes the nature of transmedia serials, which is subjective because it shows multiple viewpoints and perspectives from secondary and supporting characters, thus offering backstory in a more elaborated fictional world. The motion pictures all remain superhero movies with intense action sequences, optimistic moods and a little bit of humour, and just like the Marvel comic books, these films are made to entertain. Marvel's key to success was their transmedia strategy. Not only have they been a record-breaking member of the movie charts, their practice even influenced their biggest rival, DC, to also make a similar cinematic universe.
Emotion. Marvel Comics are limited to images to portray emotion. There's several ways they do this. When they have a sad moment, they change the way they light the photos, and they often add emotion lines around their characters. For example, in Captain America Civil War, Captain America has just died, and you can see that the lighting, facial expressions, and body language of Tony Stark displays how much emotion he is feeling in this situation. Spider-Man is a particular character that really explains how producers use the narrative capacities of comic books. Due to the mask of Peter Parker, it makes it a lot more difficult for him to portray emotion. He has to rely on the use of his body language and text. From the comic book cover shown, Spider-Man is sluggish and has his head placed in his hands. But because this isn't a moving picture, the readers have to use their common sense in order to understand how he is feeling. In 2001, Marvel had a month of comic books which they included no dialogue. They relied purely on art. It was an event called Nuff Said. In The Punisher issue 7, page 10, we see a scene in which we assume the Punisher is looking for someone and threatening someone in the toilet. Although there is no words throughout the whole comic, we know exactly what is going on. The body language and the facial expressions say everything that we need to know. But as well as this, they make it so the readers can make up their own dialogue and share their thoughts on what could have been said. Visualize sound. In Marvel comic books, or in any comic books, there is a sincere lack of audio because it's on paper. So the producers have to rely purely on visual sound. which is a technique in which speech bubbles are placed on the page in order to help readers imagine the sounds that are going on in the current scene. This technique is used in most comic book fight scenes. As well as sound effects, comic book producers also have to show speech, and they do this in many different ways. If we look at this section from Deadpool, we see a square box and some circles, both with text inside them. These are known as word balloons. They give the reader a visual clue into the sound that is being used in the current sequence. The square bubble represents Deadpool's thoughts, and the round ones represent what Deadpool is actually saying. When the producers use this form of storytelling, it is obviously very effective in getting the message across to the readers. Colour. In Marvel comic books, they use colour very specifically. One of the ways they use it is to represent good and evil characters of the franchise. For example, if we look at Spider-Man's costumes, they are blue and red with a black spider on the chest. According to a colour lovers chart, blue and red are often associated with the ultimate hero. In 1984, Spider-Man's costume turned to black, when he turned to Venom specifically. According to the same chart, black is often associated with villains and bad people. So when Spider-Man's costume turns black, he turns evil. Another example of colour being used to display a character is with Thanos from the Avengers. Thanos is a supervillain. The way this is instantly shown is with his costume, which is dominated by purple and dark blue. In the colour lovers chart, they point out dark blue as representing blue-blooded evil characters, and purple being associated with poison. But instantly, whenever any reader sees Thanos, you know he's pure evil.
Marvel Superheroes is the first game to be set in the Marvel Universe. First published by TRS 1984 under license from Marvel Comics, allow users to assume the roles of superheroes from Marvel Comics, a role-playing game with a combat system sufficient to resolve comic book-style heroic fights. In LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2013, like other LEGO game adaptations, LEGO Marvel Superheroes takes the Marvel franchise and puts it in the LEGO world. In this game, you get to play as 150 Marvel characters, each with their own character-specific moves and abilities. With an open world featuring many of the Marvel Universe's iconic locations, the game even features Stan Lee as an unlockable character, formerly editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. A game like this starts with a character roster. Straight away you are playing with Iron Man and Hulk, then joined with the rest of the Avengers, Fantastic Four, the X-Men and Spider-Man. The game also has many villains, including Doctor Doom, Loki and Magneto. What makes this big cast work is the entrances and exits for these characters are part of a very focused, strong story which is firmly rooted within the Marvel matchups and settings, from Dr. Octopus crashing the newspaper to Loki rallying the Frost Giants in Asgard. The game is authentic Marvel. Makes the audience experience the same seamless story. In between missions you can explore the entire island of Manhattan or go to the SHIELD helicarrier. Side missions round out the story and introduce characters like Daredevil and Ant-Man. The Traveller's Tale LEGO games model is quite refined. They have done a good job of adapting the Marvel characters' powers from swinging around as Spider-Man to Mr. Fantastic's fighting style. LEGO Marvel's detailed imitations of these characters simulate the characters from the comics. Bigger characters can emulate strength challenges. Most of the powers fit the gameplay and stay true to the franchise. The content of the missions has massive levels with multi-part affairs which keep momentum high and a hub that is full of content for the Marvel audience. Marvel's Interstellar Guardians of the Galaxy 2017 has a natural fit to storytelling Telltale puts out. Episode 1, Tangled Up in the Blue, manages to pull together some of the best elements of the comic books. The studio's ability to apply well-paced and witty comedy with just enough inactivity for the audience to feel part of the action. Scott Porter's version of Peter Quill's Star-Lord is a little lighter on the delivery than Chris Pratt, but he brings a relatable emotional depth to the character. The dialogue is clever and satisfying, which echoes that director James Gunn put together for the Guardians movies. The writing behind the episodes really shows during the emotional and character-driven scenes.